Life is unpredictable, but your mind doesn't have to be. This audiobook will teach you how to stay calm, resilient, and in control, no matter what life throws your way. The Stoic Way. Introduction. Your heart pounds against your chest, muscles tense as adrenaline floods your system. Thoughts spiral into an unstoppable torrent of justifications and accusations. In this moment, anger feels like power, a surge of energy promising control, righteousness, and the validation you deserve. But beneath this familiar surge lies an uncomfortable truth. Anger's promise of power is an illusion, one that extracts a devastating toll on your well-being, relationships, and capacity for joy. You know this cost intimately. The exhaustion that follows an emotional outburst, the regret of words spoken in heated moments, the strain on relationships as others withdraw from your intensity, the endless mental replay of provocations and grievances that keeps you anchored to past hurts while poisoning present moments. Yet letting go feels impossible, perhaps even dangerous. After all, isn't anger sometimes justified? Don't some situations demand a forceful response? These questions reveal anger's clever disguise. It positions itself as a protector, a source of strength, a way to demand respect or right wrongs. But while anger may feel like power in the moment, it actually renders you powerless, reactive rather than responsive, controlled by triggers rather than choosing your path. It's a prison built of righteous indignation, where the walls may feel familiar but the cost of residence is your freedom. This book offers a different path, not through suppression or control, strategies that often backfire by adding pressure to an already volatile emotional state. Instead, you'll discover how to truly release anger through deep understanding and transformed perception. You'll learn why trying to control anger is like trying to control the weather, exhausting and ultimately futile, while developing the ability to navigate emotional storms with grace and wisdom. You may wonder, won't letting go make me weak? How can I release anger when it feels so justified? What about situations that genuinely require a firm response? These natural concerns will be thoroughly addressed as you progress through these pages. You'll discover that true power lies not in your ability to express anger, but in your capacity to choose your response to any situation. Imagine moving through life unburdened by the weight of accumulated resentments. Picture yourself responding to provocations with clarity and wisdom, rather than reactive emotion. Envision maintaining inner peace, regardless of external circumstances. This isn't just a pleasant fantasy, it's the natural result of mastering the art of letting go. Your journey toward emotional freedom begins with a simple but profound shift in perspective. True power lies not in controlling what happens to you, but in mastering your response to it. As you turn these pages, you'll discover how to transform anger from your master to your teacher, revealing the path to lasting peace that has been within you all along. This transformation unfolds naturally as you recognize that each moment of frustration offers a choice, an opportunity to break free from old patterns and access deeper wisdom. The very situations that once triggered automatic reactions become doorways to greater self-mastery, showing you that freedom was never about eliminating challenges, but about approaching them with newfound clarity and purpose. Chapter 1. The Fire That Burns Both Ways. Picture yourself gripping a burning coal, muscles tensed with the intention of hurling it at someone who has wronged you. Your focus remains fixed on your target, rehearsing all the reasons they deserve this fiery projectile. Yet in this intense fixation on delivering pain to another, you've become blind to a crucial reality. The coal scorches your own flesh first, inflicting damage long before it might reach its intended target. This primal response, the surge of anger that feels like power, emerges from ancient survival mechanisms wired deep within your brain. In our evolutionary past, this instant mobilization of energy served a vital purpose, preparing you to fight or flee from immediate physical threats. But in today's world, where social media comments, traffic jams, and workplace conflicts trigger these same circuits, this once protective response has become a liability. Your body cannot distinguish between a life-threatening danger and a provocative email. Each angry episode floods your system with cortisol and adrenaline, creating a cascade of physiological effects that extend far beyond the triggering moment. Your heart rate accelerates, blood pressure rises, and digestive system disrupts. Your immune function becomes compromised, leaving you more vulnerable to illness. Cognitive abilities narrow, limiting your capacity to think creatively or see situations clearly. The burning coal of anger literally becomes a fire within, consuming the vessel that contains it. While anger may feel like strength, it actually depletes your energy reserves, corrodes your health, and diminishes your capacity for joy. Each surge of rage triggers an inflammatory response in your body, contributing to chronic conditions and accelerating cellular aging. The price of habitual anger extends far beyond emotional turmoil. It becomes inscribed in your physical being. You might recognize anger's apparent benefits: the surge of energy, the temporary sense of power, the feeling of righteousness that accompanies moral indignation. Perhaps anger has seemed like protection, a way to demand respect or establish boundaries. But consider the hidden costs: strained relationships, missed opportunities, impaired judgment, and the exhaustion that follows emotional storms. Most significantly, anger creates an illusion of control while actually rendering you reactive, controlled by external triggers rather than responding from inner wisdom. Like a forest fire that consumes everything in its path, unchecked anger eventually destroys what it claims to protect. The forest provides the very fuel that feeds its own destruction, just as your justified grievances become the substance that perpetuates your suffering. The fire of anger, once ignited, rarely stays contained to its intended target. It spreads, consuming relationships, opportunities, and peace of mind indiscriminately. This destructive pattern begins within you first. Long before anger impacts its intended target, it creates internal havoc, constricting your breathing, tensing your muscles, narrowing your perspective, and hijacking your nervous system. Your body becomes a battlefield, and you its first casualty. Learning to recognize anger's physical signatures in your own body creates the foundation for transformation. Notice the tightening in your jaw, the churning in your stomach, the shallow quality of your breath. These bodily sensations serve as early warning signals, indicators that the coal is beginning to burn. This awareness itself becomes a tool for change, creating space between trigger and response where new choices become possible. This understanding of anger's true nature, its evolutionary origins, physiological impact, and self-destructive essence, forms the cornerstone for the journey ahead. As you continue through these pages, you'll discover that letting go of anger doesn't mean becoming passive or defenseless. Instead, it means choosing freedom over the illusion of control, responding rather than reacting, and protecting yourself first from the very fire you've been using as a weapon. Through this transformation, you'll develop a new relationship with your emotions, one built on wisdom rather than impulse. Your anger becomes not an enemy to suppress or a weapon to wield, but a signal to pause, reflect, and choose your path forward with clarity and purpose. This shift in perspective opens the door to a profound liberation, where your response to life's challenges flows from your deepest values rather than your reactive patterns. Chapter 2. The Stories That Fuel Our Flames. Picture yourself standing before two mirrors in a dimly lit room. The first mirror shows only what has wounded you: the slights, the rejections, the moments of disrespect that fuel your anger. This mirror magnifies every offense while filtering out context, nuance, and contradictory information. The second mirror reveals a broader view, not just the triggering event, but the full tapestry of human experience surrounding it, including perspectives you hadn't considered and circumstances you couldn't see. These mirrors represent two fundamentally different ways of perceiving reality during moments of anger. The first mirror reflects how your mind naturally narrows during emotional activation, focusing exclusively on evidence that justifies your reaction. Like a camera zooming in on a single detail while blurring the surrounding scene, anger creates tunnel vision that obscures the bigger picture. When you stand before that first mirror, neutral events transform into personal affronts through the stories you attach to them. An unanswered message becomes evidence of deliberate dismissal. A colleague's constructive feedback morphs into an attack on your competence. A partner's request for space warps into proof they're pulling away. Your mind races to assign meaning to these situations, crafting narratives that feel absolutely true in the moment. These interpretations arise with such speed and certainty that they masquerade as direct perception of reality. Yet they represent only one possible way of understanding what's occurring, and usually not the most accurate or helpful one. Your brain, designed to protect you from threats, automatically generates worst-case scenarios and self-protective narratives. This tendency served our ancestors well when assuming a rustle in the grass was a predator rather than the wind. But in modern life, this same mechanism creates unnecessary suffering. Consider how a forest path becomes more defined with each passing traveler. Every footstep deepens the groove, making it increasingly likely that future wanderers will follow the same route. Your interpretive patterns work similarly. Each time you react to a situation with a particular narrative, you strengthen that neural pathway. Eventually, these well-worn mental trails become your default routes through challenging situations, redirecting your thoughts down familiar angry corridors before you've had a chance to consider alternatives. These habitual interpretations create self-fulfilling prophecies through confirmation bias. If you believe someone disrespects you, you'll notice every gesture that could possibly support this view while filtering out evidence to the contrary. Your anger-generating stories become self-reinforcing perception filters, operating below conscious awareness to maintain their apparent truth. The key to breaking free from these automatic patterns lies in developing your capacity for story spotting, catching yourself in the act of creating inflammatory narratives rather than observing reality directly. This requires learning to distinguish between objective events and subjective interpretations. An objective event might be, they didn't respond to my message for 2 days. The subjective interpretation that generates anger would be, they're deliberately ignoring me because I don't matter to them. This distinction creates crucial space between perception and reaction where choice becomes possible. By recognizing your stories as stories rather than reality, you begin to loosen their hold on your emotional responses. You develop the ability to pause and ask, what else might be true here that I'm not seeing? What alternative interpretations might explain this situation? This awareness reveals how many of your anger triggers stem not from events themselves, but from recurring narrative patterns. Stories of being disrespected, treated unfairly, deliberately harmed, or having your worth questioned. These patterns often trace back to early experiences and core beliefs about yourself and others. By identifying your particular story signatures, the specific types of interpretations that reliably generate anger for you, you gain power to challenge and transform them. Standing before those two mirrors becomes a choice point. Will you continue gazing into the first mirror, letting its distorted reflection validate and intensify your anger? Or will you turn to face the second mirror, allowing its wider view to reveal new possibilities for understanding and response? The path to freedom opens when you recognize that while you can't always control events, you maintain authorship over the stories you tell about them. Chapter 3. The Illusion of Control. The ocean moves with timeless rhythm, its waves rolling endlessly toward shore, neither accelerating nor slowing in response to human desires. Picture someone standing at the water's edge, voice growing hoarse from shouting commands at the sea. Stop moving, they demand. Grow larger. Change direction. Their frustration mounts as each wave continues its predestined path, completely unmoved by these attempts at control. Energy depletes, anger rises, yet the ocean remains utterly indifferent to their demands. This fundamental misunderstanding about what we can and cannot control creates the perfect breeding ground for anger. You expend precious energy trying to bend reality to your will, attempting to control others' behaviors, manipulate outcomes, or even suppress your own emotions. When life inevitably fails to conform to these demands, anger erupts not because something has gone wrong, but because you're fighting against the very nature of existence. Consider how much of your mental and emotional energy focuses on your circle of concern, everything that matters to you or impacts your life. This includes others' opinions, future outcomes, past events, market fluctuations, weather patterns, aging, and countless other factors beyond your direct influence. While it's natural to care about these things, believing you should be able to control them creates a persistent sense of powerlessness and frustration. In contrast, your circle of influence contains what you can actually affect directly: your responses, choices, efforts, and attitudes. When you focus primarily on your circle of concern while neglecting your circle of influence, you experience life as a series of violations against your will rather than opportunities for meaningful action. The desire for control stems from a natural human need for safety and predictability. Your mind seeks certainty as a form of protection, creating the illusion that if you could just make everything behave according to your preferences, you would finally feel secure. Yet this very attachment to control paradoxically generates more suffering than security. Like trying to straighten a river's path by pushing against its current, attempting to force reality into alignment with your demands depletes your energy while accomplishing nothing. The river will continue flowing along its natural course, shaped by countless factors beyond any individual's control. True power comes not from fighting the current, but from understanding its patterns and working with them skillfully. This represents the crucial distinction between acceptance and resignation. Acceptance means clearly seeing and acknowledging what is beyond your control without adding resistance. Resignation carries a sense of defeat and helplessness. Acceptance liberates energy for effective action within your sphere of influence, while resignation paralyzes you in perceived powerlessness. The need to control often masks deeper fears and vulnerabilities. Behind demands that others behave differently often lies fear of rejection or abandonment. Behind rigid expectations for yourself often lies fear of inadequacy. Behind attempts to control outcomes often lies fear of uncertainty. When these underlying fears remain unacknowledged, they generate reactive anger as a form of protection. When brought into conscious awareness, they begin to lose their power over your emotional responses. Every triggering situation contains elements both within and beyond your control. A control inventory creates clarity by honestly assessing which aspects you can influence and which you must accept. Consider your morning commute encountering unexpected traffic. Beyond your control, the number of cars on the road, others' driving behaviors, construction delays, weather conditions. Within your control, your departure time, route selection, emotional response, use of the delay, listening to audiobooks, practicing acceptance, and learning from the experience to better plan future trips. This clarity naturally reduces anger's intensity by redirecting energy from futile resistance to effective action. Rather than raging against traffic's existence, you focus on optimizing what you can influence. Rather than demanding others change their personalities to suit you, you adjust your own responses and boundaries. Rather than insisting reality conform to your preferences, you develop flexibility and resilience in engaging with life as it actually is. The paradox reveals itself. Releasing the illusion of control actually increases your true power. When you stop exhausting yourself trying to control the ocean's waves, you can direct that energy toward learning to surf them skillfully. You discover that freedom comes not from making life obey your commands, but from developing the wisdom to work with reality rather than against it. Chapter 4. The Past That Never Leaves. Through your journey in life, you walk carrying a heavy trunk filled with every hurt, insult, and disappointment you've ever experienced. Inside this trunk lie moments of betrayal, words that cut deep, times you were overlooked or disrespected, each one preserved as if it happened yesterday. With each passing year, the trunk grows heavier, its contents multiplying as new injuries join the collection. You grip the handle tighter, convinced these painful memories must be retained, protected, remembered. This psychological baggage shapes every step you take, limiting where you can go and what you can experience. The weight of accumulated grievances restricts your movement, narrows your possibilities, and drains energy that could be directed toward growth and connection. Yet the thought of setting down this trunk, even briefly, creates anxiety, as if letting go of past hurts might somehow leave you vulnerable to future ones. Your mind has developed intricate protective patterns, scanning each interaction for potential threats based on this catalog of previous pain. When someone doesn't immediately respond to your message, the trunk springs open, pulling out every instance of being ignored. When a colleague disagrees with your idea, upsurface all the times your voice wasn't heard. What might otherwise be minor frictions in daily life trigger disproportionate reactions because they connect with this unhealed history. This hypervigilance transforms neutral interactions into potential threats, creating a self-perpetuating cycle. The weight of past experiences colors your perception so thoroughly that you find evidence of disrespect, rejection, or harm, even where none exists. Like wearing glasses tinted by old pain, you cannot see people or situations as they truly are in the present moment. The hurts you've experienced were real. The disrespect was genuine. The betrayals actually happened. This validation of your past pain is crucial. Denying or minimizing genuine wounds only adds to their weight. However, there's a profound difference between remembering the past and being imprisoned by it, between learning from experience and being defined by it. When you carry forward unresolved anger from past situations, you transform present experience into an endless reenactment of old wounds. Today's interactions aren't evaluated on their own terms, but through the accumulated weight of similar moments from your history. This creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. Your expectation of hurt unconsciously draws you toward interactions that confirm your existing beliefs about how you'll be treated. Your anger from the past becomes a lens through which you view the present, distorting every interaction. That colleague who seems distant may be struggling with personal challenges, but through your historical lens, their behavior joins your collection of evidence that people are uncaring. The friend who forgot your birthday becomes another exhibit in your case that you can't rely on others. These historical echoes, where current situations trigger unresolved feelings from the past, create reactions vastly disproportionate to present circumstances. You're not just responding to what's happening now, but to the accumulated weight of every similar experience stored in that heavy trunk. Understanding this pattern creates the crucial awareness needed to respond to present reality rather than reliving old wounds. This recognition of how past experiences influence present perception becomes a key to liberation. When you can identify historical echoes in your emotional reactions, you gain the power to choose whether to interpret current situations through the lens of past pain or to see them fresh, as they truly are, in this moment. This awareness creates the possibility of truly inhabiting the present, free from the distorting influence of accumulated resentments. The contents of your trunk served a purpose, protecting you, teaching you, helping you survive. But continuing to carry this weight limits who you can become. True freedom isn't found in accumulating better ways to protect old hurts, but in developing the wisdom to learn from the past without being imprisoned by it. Each painful memory, each defensive strategy, each emotional scar taught you something vital about navigating a challenging world. Yet clinging to these old protections now acts like an anchor, holding you back from experiencing life's full richness. Your survival mechanisms served their purpose, but they've outlived their usefulness. Now they're keeping you trapped in familiar patterns when you could be exploring new possibilities. Freedom emerges not from building stronger walls around your wounds, but from developing the strength to stand vulnerably in the present moment, informed by your past, without being controlled by it. Chapter 5. The Hidden Benefits of Rage. Picture yourself gripping a massive shield, its weight pressing into your arm, restricting your movement and consuming your energy. You stand in a peaceful meadow, surrounded by gentle breezes and blooming flowers. Yet you refuse every suggestion to lower your defense. When others point out there are no threats in sight, you insist this shield keeps you safe, even as it prevents you from reaching out to pick the flowers or feeling the warmth of the sun on your skin. This protective barrier has become so familiar, you no longer question its necessity. Like anger itself, your shield promises safety while secretly imprisoning you. The weight of maintaining constant vigilance exhausts you, yet the thought of setting it down creates immediate anxiety. After all, this shield has been with you through countless battles. It represents strength, protection, righteousness. How could you possibly face life without it? The appeal of anger extends far beyond mere protection. It offers a seductive sense of moral superiority. the satisfaction of knowing you're right and they're wrong. When you're angry, you stand on higher ground, looking down at those who've wronged you. This righteousness becomes addictive, providing a temporary boost to self-esteem through the judgment of others. Anger also serves as a powerful distance regulator, keeping potential threats and potential intimacy at arm's length. By maintaining a defensive posture, you never have to risk the vulnerability of genuine connection. Your shield becomes a barrier not just against harm, but against the messy, uncomfortable terrain of authentic relationship. It's easier to remain angry than to risk being hurt again. The illusion of power anger provides can become especially compelling. In moments of feeling powerless or victimized, anger surges through you like a rush of strength. It creates a sense of agency, even if that agency is ultimately destructive. The fired-up sensation of anger can feel far preferable to underlying feelings of helplessness or fear. Anger conveniently places responsibility for your pain squarely on others' shoulders. As long as you're focused on what they did wrong, you don't have to examine your own choices or patterns. The shield of anger deflects not just external threats, but also internal reflection. It protects you from the discomfort of taking responsibility for your part in difficult situations. Like a wall that both protects and imprisons, anger keeps perceived threats out, while simultaneously restricting your freedom. The more you rely on it for protection, the more it limits your ability to experience life's full range of emotions and connections. You become trapped behind your own defenses, unable to reach out or let others in. This emotional dependency makes anger feel necessary for survival. The thought of releasing it triggers fear. Without this shield, how will you protect yourself? Who will you be without the familiar weight of resentment? The identity you've built around being wronged, around being the righteous one who was hurt, feels too integral to simply set aside. Yet understanding these hidden payoffs is essential for genuine transformation. You cannot truly release what you don't recognize you're holding on to. Each benefit anger seems to provide, protection, superiority, distance, power, blame shifting, must be examined honestly. Only then can you consciously develop healthier ways to meet these legitimate needs. Your need for safety is valid. Your desire for justice is reasonable. Your instinct to protect yourself makes perfect sense. But anger has become a reflexive response that often creates the very isolation and pain you're trying to avoid. Like the person in the meadow struggling under their shield, you may be sacrificing more than you're protecting. Recognizing anger's hidden payoffs allows you to consciously choose more effective ways to feel secure, maintain appropriate boundaries, and honor your worth. Instead of reactive rage, you can develop thoughtful responses. Instead of defensive walls, you can create permeable boundaries that allow genuine connection while maintaining healthy limits. The shield you carry served a purpose. It protected you during genuinely threatening times. But continuing to bear its weight in peaceful meadows prevents you from experiencing the very peace you seek. True security isn't found in maintaining impenetrable defenses, but in developing the wisdom to distinguish real threats from phantom fears, and the courage to remain open to life even in the face of uncertainty. Chapter 6. The Anatomy of Triggering. Like a single spark landing in dry kindling, anger's progression from trigger to overwhelming emotion follows a precise and predictable path. What appears as an instantaneous explosion actually unfolds through distinct stages, each one building upon the last until the forest of your mind is ablaze. Understanding this progression transforms what feels like an automatic reaction into a sequence where intervention becomes possible. Your anger ignites through a precise chain of events, beginning with the activating trigger, a comment, a gesture, a situation that pierces your emotional defenses. This trigger, often seemingly minor to others, connects with deeper meanings you've assigned based on past experiences. Within milliseconds, your brain's threat detection system, the amygdala, activates, flooding your body with stress hormones before your rational mind can fully process what's occurring. This biological response triggers immediate physiological changes: increased heart rate, shallow breathing, muscle tension, reduced blood flow to your prefrontal cortex where rational thinking occurs. Your body prepares for threat even as your conscious mind scrambles to make sense of the situation. The meaning you attach to the trigger, often unconscious and shaped by past wounds, determines the intensity of your response. Your anger progresses through predictable stages: activation, interpretation, physiological response, emotional flooding, and behavioral reaction. Yet this progression that feels automatic actually contains multiple points where awareness can create choice. Like recognizing the distinct stages of a fire's growth, understanding anger's anatomy reveals opportunities for intervention before the blaze becomes uncontrollable. Each individual carries unique triggers, emotional buttons installed by past experiences that others seem to push with devastating accuracy. What sparks intense anger in you might barely register for another, while their triggers may seem equally puzzling to you. These triggers connect to core beliefs about safety, respect, fairness, and worth. Beliefs often formed through painful experiences long before you develop the capacity to question them. The neurobiology of triggering helps explain why willpower alone often fails to control anger. When the amygdala detects a threat, real or perceived, it can bypass the rational brain's regulatory function, creating reactions that feel beyond conscious control. This amygdala hijack evolved to protect you from immediate physical dangers, but in modern life more often creates emotional responses disproportionate to actual threats. Yet understanding this progression begins to transform it. Awareness itself creates space within the sequence, the ability to recognize I'm being triggered rather than simply being swept away by the reaction. This recognition, even after the fact, begins to weaken the automatic nature of the response. Like a scientist studying a chemical reaction, you can begin to observe your triggers with curiosity rather than judgment. The intensity of your triggers often reflects the depth of underlying wounds. When someone's words or actions seem to push your buttons with surgical precision, they've often connected with unhealed hurt or unmet needs from your past. These historical echoes amplify current triggers, making present moment responses feel overwhelming precisely because they're carrying the weight of accumulated pain. This anatomy of anger reveals why certain techniques work while others fail. Trying to control anger through willpower alone ignores the biological reality of triggering. True transformation requires understanding the full progression, from initial spark through interpretation to reaction. Only by mapping this terrain can you begin to navigate it consciously rather than being driven by unconscious patterns. Your triggers are not character flaws to eliminate, but signposts pointing toward areas needing attention and healing. By understanding their origins and the beliefs that give them power, you transform them from unconscious controllers into opportunities for growth. Each triggered moment becomes a chance to respond differently, to choose consciousness over automaticity. The complexity of this progression explains why simplistic advice to just calm down or let it go proves ineffective. These suggestions ignore the intricate chain reaction occurring beneath the surface. Real change requires understanding the full anatomy of your anger, the sensitive spots in your emotional terrain, the meanings you assign to specific triggers, the physiological cascade that follows activation. Your anger isn't a simple switch to flip off, but a sophisticated alarm system wired through your entire being. Each triggering event travels through layers of interpretation, personal history, and bodily response before emerging as visible emotion. Without mapping these deeper connections, you remain caught in surface-level solutions that might temporarily mask symptoms while leaving the underlying system unchanged. True mastery comes from exploring the full architecture of your emotional responses, learning to recognize early warning signals, and understanding the unique way your mind processes perceived threats. Chapter 7. The Space Between Stimulus and Response. Between every trigger and your response lies a space, a moment of profound possibility that most never notice as they rush down familiar paths of reaction. This space, though often collapsed to near invisibility by habit and unconscious patterns, contains the seed of your freedom from anger's grip. When provocation arises, you stand at an invisible crossroads. One direction leading to the well-worn trail of anger with its false promises of power and relief, the other opening toward a liberation you may sense, but haven't fully claimed. In this critical moment, your feet often begin moving toward the habitual path before conscious awareness arises. The neural pathways of reaction, strengthened through countless repetitions, create a momentum that can feel overwhelming. Yet within this automatic unfolding lies a revolutionary truth first articulated by psychiatrist Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response exists a space, and in that space lies your power to choose your response. This gap, naturally present in human consciousness yet often overlooked, holds the key to transforming your relationship with anger. When you're caught in reactivity, this space collapses to nearly nothing. Trigger and response seem to occur simultaneously, leaving you feeling helpless in the face of provocation. But through deliberate attention and practice, this same space can expand, creating room for choice where before there seemed only compulsion. Think of this space as a buffer zone between you and potentially triggering events. Initially, this zone might be paper thin, offering barely a moment's pause before reaction takes over. But like a muscle strengthened through exercise, this space grows with cultivation. What begins as a hairline crack of possibility gradually widens into a sphere of conscious choice. Various factors influence the width of this gap. Stress, fatigue, and accumulated triggers compress it, making reactive patterns more likely. Emotional overload and physical tension narrow your window of choice. Yet practices that cultivate present moment awareness naturally expand this space. Regular meditation, conscious breathing, and consistent self-observation develop your capacity to inhabit this gap more fully. The true power of this space lies not in suppressing anger, but in creating enough distance to see it clearly. Within this gap, you can notice the physical sensations of activation, witness the stories and interpretations arising, and choose your response rather than being driven by unconscious patterns. This space becomes the foundation of emotional sovereignty, the ability to respond consciously rather than react automatically. What makes this space so significant is that it exists before the cascade of physiological and psychological reactions fully engages. By catching anger at its inception point, you access choice before the full momentum of reaction builds. This early awareness creates possibilities that become increasingly difficult to access once anger's chemistry floods your system. The revolutionary nature of this understanding lies in its universality. This space exists within every human consciousness, requiring only recognition and cultivation to become a powerful tool for transformation. You don't need to create this space. You only need to notice and expand what's already present. When you stand in this space, even for a moment, you step out of identification with anger into the position of witness. This shift in perspective, though subtle, fundamentally alters your relationship with triggering events. Instead of being swept along by reaction, you maintain a groundedness that allows for conscious choice. This space serves as the foundation for all other anger transformation practices. Without it, techniques for managing anger remain superficial, attempting to control or suppress what's already in full motion. But with awareness of this gap, every trigger becomes an opportunity to practice presence and expand your capacity for conscious response. Understanding this space transforms how you view emotional mastery. Rather than seeing it as a battle to control or eliminate anger, you recognize it as a practice of expanding awareness into this crucial gap. The more familiar you become with this space, the more naturally you'll find yourself inhabiting it when triggers arise. The most profound aspect of this understanding is its immediate accessibility. This space exists right now, in this moment, requiring no special circumstances or preparations to access. It's available whenever you remember to notice it, growing more accessible with each conscious recognition. No matter how caught up you might be in daily pressures or emotional storms, this gap remains your constant companion, a refuge of clarity hiding in plain sight. Each time you pause to acknowledge its presence, you strengthen your natural capacity to step back from reactivity. Even in situations that once seemed overwhelming, you'll find yourself naturally discovering this space, as if greeting an old friend who's been waiting patiently for your return. Chapter 8. The Witness Within. The power to transform your relationship with anger lies not in controlling emotional storms, but in discovering the calm center that remains untouched by them. Imagine yourself inside a secure, peaceful home during an intense thunderstorm. Lightning illuminates the sky in brilliant flashes. Thunder rolls across the landscape with primal force, and occasional tremors remind you of nature's raw power. Yet here you sit, fundamentally untouched by the elements, perhaps even appreciating the storm's intensity from your position of safety. This experience perfectly mirrors the revolutionary shift in perspective available in your relationship with anger. Just as you can witness a storm's fury from a place of shelter, you can observe intense emotions without being swept away by them. This capacity isn't something you need to create. It's already present within you as your natural awareness, your observing self. Most people live exclusively identified with their emotional experience. When anger arises, they immediately become anger, losing all perspective in its consuming flame. "I am angry" becomes their entire reality, leaving no space for choice or transformation. But there exists another possibility: the ability to notice anger is arising while maintaining connection with the deeper awareness that witnesses all experience. This witnessing presence, sometimes called your observing self, remains perpetually undisturbed by emotional weather patterns. Like the vast sky that contains but is never damaged by storms, this fundamental awareness provides a spacious context for all experience without being limited by any particular state. It's the background against which all thoughts, emotions, and sensations appear and disappear. Understanding this distinction between being anger and witnessing anger creates a profound shift in your relationship with triggering events. Instead of becoming immediately identified with reactive patterns, you discover the possibility of maintaining perspective even amid intense emotion. This isn't about suppressing or denying anger. It's about expanding your sense of self to include the awareness that experiences anger rather than being limited to anger itself. The witnessing perspective reveals anger's true nature as a temporary phenomenon moving through consciousness, rather than an identity or inescapable reality. Like weather patterns crossing the sky, emotional states arise, intensify, and eventually pass of their own accord when not fueled by identification. This natural process of emergence and dissolution becomes visible only from the vantage point of the observing self. Connecting with witness consciousness doesn't require years of meditation or special circumstances. This awareness is already present, watching these words as you read them, noticing thoughts and emotions as they arise. It's the simple sense of being here now, the cognizance that knows experience is happening. While this awareness can be strengthened through practice, it's never absent, even in moments of intense reactivity. When you learn to access this witness perspective during triggering events, you discover an inner sanctuary that remains available regardless of external circumstances. Like the secure home during a storm, this awareness provides shelter without cutting you off from direct experience. You can feel anger's full intensity while maintaining the crucial space that prevents total identification. This capacity for witnessing transforms anger from an overwhelming force that possesses you into an experience moving through your field of awareness. The shift may seem subtle initially, but its implications are profound. Rather than being anger's helpless victim, you become its conscious observer, able to respond with wisdom rather than react from conditioning. The key lies in recognizing this witnessing presence in ordinary moments, strengthening your connection with it when triggers aren't present. Notice right now the awareness reading these words. Feel the sensations in your body. Observe thoughts arising and passing. This simple recognition of your observing self builds the foundation for maintaining perspective when emotional storms arise. With practice, you'll discover this witness perspective remains accessible even amid intense provocation. Like developing any new capacity, it grows stronger through consistent attention. Each time you catch yourself lost in reaction and remember to step back into awareness, you strengthen this crucial faculty. The witnessing self becomes your refuge, not an escape from experience, but a broader context that allows you to engage with life's full intensity while maintaining inner freedom. This sustained connection with witness consciousness naturally transforms your relationship with anger. Rather than fearing or fighting against emotional intensity, you discover the ability to be with it skillfully. Like watching a storm from a place of security, you can allow anger's energy to move through you without being overwhelmed by it. Chapter 9. The language that liberates. Your relationship with anger transforms profoundly through the deliberate, conscious use of language. The same situation can ignite rage or invite understanding based solely on how you describe it internally and externally. When a colleague speaks over you during a meeting, you might internally narrate, "She deliberately disrespected me in front of everyone, trying to make me look incompetent." Or you might observe, "She interrupted while I was speaking," which felt frustrating and made it difficult to complete my point. Notice how dramatically these different descriptions shape your emotional response. The first interpretation employs inflammatory language that assumes negative intentions, catastrophizes the impact, and frames the situation as a personal attack. The second acknowledges the objective behavior and your emotional response while leaving space for multiple interpretations. Language isn't merely descriptive. It actively constructs your reality. The words you choose become the architecture through which you experience events, creating neural pathways that shape how you perceive and respond to similar situations in the future. When you consistently use absolute terms like always or never, you build rigid thought patterns that blind you to exceptions and nuance. When you employ catastrophizing language like completely ruined or totally destroyed, you create an emotional magnitude that overwhelms your capacity for measured response. Consider how blame-oriented phrasing like "made me feel" surrenders your emotional sovereignty to others, while mind-reading assumptions about intentions, "they're trying to push my buttons," create enemies out of uncertainty. Identity labels transform temporary behaviors into permanent character traits. "They're inconsiderate" versus "their action felt inconsiderate to me." Each linguistic choice either constricts or expands your perspective, either fueling anger's fire or creating space for understanding. This insight reveals remarkable power. By consciously choosing different words, you fundamentally alter your experience. Like a skilled translator helping two parties understand each other, you can learn to translate inflammatory language into expressions that create psychological space. Instead of, "they're always late because they don't respect my time," you might say, "they've arrived after the agreed time several times, which impacts my schedule." Rather than, "they're trying to manipulate me," you could observe, "their request makes me feel pressured." Your habitual language patterns aren't your fault. They likely developed as protective mechanisms, attempts to validate your experience or defend against hurt. Yet understanding their impact empowers you to make different choices. Every time you catch yourself using inflammatory language and consciously choose more measured expressions, you're literally rewiring your brain's response patterns. Think of inflammatory language as gasoline poured on anger's fire. It might provide momentary satisfaction, but ultimately intensifies the burning. Conscious language acts like water, gradually diminishing intensity while creating space for cooling reflection. This isn't about suppressing your experience or using artificially positive language. It's about finding expressions that acknowledge reality while maintaining perspective. The neural pathways you strengthen through language become increasingly automatic with repetition. Each time you describe a situation with inflammatory language, you deepen channels of reactivity. Each time you employ conscious language, you strengthen neural networks supporting understanding and emotional regulation. Through repeated practice, measured expression becomes your natural response rather than a deliberate effort. The technique of linguistic reframing provides a practical tool for transforming anger-inducing language. Start by noticing absolute terms and replacing them with specific observations. Transform catastrophizing language into proportional descriptions. Shift from blame-oriented phrasing to ownership of your experience. Replace mind-reading assumptions with acknowledgement of multiple possibilities. Exchange permanent character labels for descriptions of specific behaviors. When you describe events with greater precision, you naturally create space between raw experience and interpretation. Instead of, "she always ignores me," you might say, "she didn't respond to my last two messages." Rather than, "this project is a complete disaster," try, "3 deadlines have slipped and we're facing budget concerns." Moving from, "he's trying to make me look bad," to, "I felt uncomfortable when he disagreed with my proposal in the meeting," shifts you from assumed motives to documented events. This transformation in language isn't about sugarcoating reality or denying genuine grievances. It's about describing situations with clarity and specificity that opens pathways to resolution rather than deepening emotional trenches. As you practice this shift in expression, you'll find yourself naturally gravitating toward more nuanced interpretations of challenging situations, creating mental breathing room where previously there was only suffocating certainty. Chapter 10: The Power of Presence. From your position as the guiding mentor in this transformative journey, you recognize that presence holds the key to freedom from anger's grip. The power of the present moment reveals itself most clearly through the contrast of everyday experiences. Like washing dishes, an activity we all encounter regularly yet rarely fully experience. Consider the profound difference between two ways of engaging with this simple task. In the first, your hands move mechanically through soapy water while your mind races elsewhere, rehearsing arguments from yesterday or strategizing confrontations for tomorrow. Your shoulders unconsciously tense, your breath becomes shallow, and though physically present, you're mentally lost in a maze of grievances and reactions. The simple act of cleaning becomes yet another backdrop for anger's internal theater. Now witness the same activity approached with full presence. The warm water envelops your hands, carrying subtle variations in temperature that draw your attention. Soap bubbles form and dissolve in endless unique patterns, catching light in iridescent displays that shift with each movement. The transformation of each dish from soiled to clean offers simple, immediate satisfaction. Your breath naturally deepens, your body relaxes, and the mental chatter subsides into the direct experience of the moment. This stark contrast illuminates a fundamental truth about anger. It cannot exist in pure presence. Anger requires mental time travel, either backward to past hurts or forward to imagined threats. It feeds on the stories you tell about what happened or what might happen, but dissolves when attention rests fully in the actual experience of now. The present moment offers a constant refuge from anger's grip, available in any situation. When you bring full attention to the sensory reality of now, the physical sensations in your body, the sounds in your environment, the rhythm of your breath, the mental projections that sustain anger naturally begin to dissolve. This isn't about forcing anger away or trying to maintain constant awareness. It's about recognizing that presence is your natural state, available whenever you choose to return to it. Like a clear mountain stream that purifies itself when allowed to flow freely, your awareness naturally returns to clarity when not congested by thoughts about past and future. The present moment holds an inherent peace that requires no effort. It emerges spontaneously when you stop feeding the mental activity that obscures it. This understanding transforms your relationship with anger at a fundamental level. Rather than trying to control or eliminate angry thoughts, you learn to recognize them as mental movements that pull you out of the present moment. Each time you notice yourself caught in anger's narrative, it becomes an invitation to return to the simple truth of now. The path to this freedom lies in developing what we might call presence anchors, reliable ways to bring attention back to direct experience when you notice yourself lost in anger-producing thoughts. These could be physical sensations like feeling your feet on the ground or the weight of your body in a chair. They might involve focusing on environmental sounds or the movement of breath in your body. The specific anchor matters less than the habit of returning to it. The beauty of this approach lies in its simplicity and constant availability. You don't need special conditions or extended time for practice. Every moment offers an opportunity to shift from mental projection to direct experience, from the complexity of anger's stories to the simplicity of present awareness. This is not about achieving some special state, but about returning to what's already here beneath the mental noise. Through consistent recognition of how different your experience becomes when fully present, you develop an increasing capacity to catch yourself early in anger's cycle. You begin to sense the subtle shift away from presence that precedes full identification with angry thoughts. This growing awareness creates natural gaps in anger's seemingly solid structure, allowing fresh perspectives to emerge. Presence reveals itself as both the path and the destination in releasing anger's hold. Each moment of genuine presence loosens anger's grip while simultaneously strengthening your capacity to remain present in challenging situations. This creates a positive feedback loop where presence breeds more presence, gradually transforming your default response to triggering situations. The practice is simple but profound. Whenever you notice anger arising, use it as a reminder to return to the direct experience of the present moment. Feel your body, notice your breath, observe the actual sensations and environment around you rather than the mental narrative about them. This isn't about suppressing anger, but about shifting attention to what's actually here, allowing anger's energy to naturally transform through present awareness. Chapter 11. The Gift of Empathy. Looking out across the vast expanse between two mountain peaks, you encounter a profound truth about human perception. From your position atop one summit, certain features of the landscape appear clear and obvious. The gentle slope of a meadow, a winding river's path, the play of shadows across rocky outcrops. Yet someone standing on the opposite peak sees an entirely different vista. Hidden valleys, concealed waterfalls, aspects of the terrain completely invisible from your vantage point. Neither view is wrong, yet neither tells the complete story. This fundamental limitation of perspective lies at the heart of many conflicts that generate anger. When triggered, you become convinced that your view represents the whole truth, forgetting that, like the mountain observer, you see only what your position allows. This isn't about doubting your own experience or invalidating your perspective. Rather, it's recognizing that every view, however clear it seems, captures only part of a larger reality. The challenge in any triggering situation isn't abandoning your perspective, but expanding it. Just as those mountain observers must descend and share their observations to understand the complete landscape, moving beyond anger requires the willingness to consider viewpoints that initially seem to contradict your own. This doesn't mean accepting harmful behavior or invalidating your own experience. Instead, it means developing the capacity to hold multiple truths simultaneously, to maintain your own perspective while recognizing it as inherently partial. Genuine curiosity serves as the antidote to anger's rigid certainty. When you approach triggering situations with authentic interest in understanding rather than proving yourself right, the mental patterns that sustain anger begin to loosen. This curiosity isn't about excusing harmful actions, but about recognizing the complex human reality behind them. Every person's behavior, however problematic, makes sense from within their own perspective, shaped by their experiences, beliefs, fears, and unmet needs. Think of empathy as building a bridge between perspectives. This bridge allows you to visit another's viewpoint without having to abandon your own territory. You can cross over to understand their experience while maintaining your separate identity and boundaries. This understanding transforms the perceived gap between us and them into recognition of shared humanity. Even those whose actions most disturb you are moved by fundamental human needs and fears, not unlike your own, for safety, belonging, dignity, and purpose. The resistance you might feel to considering others' perspectives, especially those who've hurt you, is natural and valid. Yet paradoxically, this understanding often provides the very freedom you seek from anger's emotional grip. When you recognize that others' actions stem from their own limited perspective rather than malicious intent, the personal sting begins to dissolve. This doesn't make their behavior acceptable, but it releases you from the exhausting cycle of personalizing and reacting to it. Moving beyond the limitation of single perspective requires developing what we might call empathic imagination, the ability to mentally inhabit viewpoints different from your own without feeling threatened by them. This capacity grows through conscious practice, through deliberately seeking to understand rather than judge, to connect rather than separate. With each expansion of perspective, anger's rigid certainty naturally softens into a more nuanced understanding. This broadened vision reveals how conflicts often arise not from genuine opposition, but from the inability to see beyond our own limited vantage point. Like those mountain observers, we each hold pieces of a larger truth. When we can share these perspectives without demanding the other abandon theirs, we move toward the kind of understanding that naturally dissolves anger's grip. The power of perspective taking lies not in abandoning your truth, but in recognizing it as one part of a larger whole. This understanding transforms angry certainty into curious exploration, rigid judgment into nuanced comprehension. It reveals how situations that seem simple from a single vantage point contain depths and complexities invisible until we dare to look through other eyes. By cultivating this broader vision, you develop increasing immunity to anger's simplistic interpretations. You learn to catch yourself in moments of rigid certainty and ask what aspects of the situation might lie in your blind spots. This doesn't mean abandoning discernment or appropriate boundaries. Rather, it means holding your perspective more loosely, remaining open to information that might expand or refine your understanding. Chapter 12: The Art of Boundaries. Looking through the lens of boundaries and their profound impact on emotional well-being reveals a fundamental truth about anger and protection. Two houses stand before you, one completely open to the elements, its inhabitant perpetually on guard against every intrusion, exhausted from constant vigilance. Another thoughtfully designed with sturdy walls and well-placed doors, and windows that can welcome or exclude as needed. This stark contrast illuminates how proper boundaries create not isolation, but the very foundation of safety required for genuine connection and peace. The relationship between boundaries and letting go of anger contains a powerful paradox. When you establish clear, healthy limits in your life, you naturally experience less anger because you prevent the accumulation of violations and resentments that fuel emotional fires. Rather than needing anger as a reactive defense mechanism, you develop proactive protection through conscious choice about what you will and won't accept in your relationships and life circumstances. Many people oscillate between extremes, either maintaining no boundaries until anger explodes as a last resort protection, or constructing rigid walls that keep out both harm and connection. This pattern reveals a crucial distinction between defensive barriers built from fear and flexible boundaries established from self-worth and clarity. The former creates isolation, while the latter enables authentic relationship. Consider how a river's banks don't constrain its flow, but rather channel its power and give it direction. Without banks, water dissipates into formless pools, losing its force and purpose. Similarly, boundaries don't restrict your energy, but focus it constructively. They create the container within which relationships can flourish, without the constant threat of transgression that generates chronic anger. Healthy boundaries protect without imprisoning. They act like a cell membrane, selectively permeable, allowing nourishment to flow in while keeping toxicity out. This selective barrier function eliminates the need for anger as a primary defense strategy. When you know you can say no to what doesn't serve you, yes becomes more meaningful and authentic. The art of boundary setting requires a specific kind of strength, not the rigid force of anger, but the calm clarity of self-respect. It means developing the capacity to articulate limits clearly and maintain them compassionately. This involves learning to recognize your own limits, communicate them effectively, and uphold them consistently without hostility or defensiveness. Proper boundaries transform relationships from potential sources of irritation into spaces of genuine connection. They create the safety necessary for vulnerability and intimacy while preventing the small violations that accumulate into resentment. By clearly defining where you end and others begin, boundaries actually enable closer connection by eliminating the fear of being overwhelmed or consumed by others' needs and demands. When you establish healthy boundaries, you no longer need anger to protect your space, dignity, or resources. The clarity of your limits, held with calm conviction rather than defensive hostility, naturally prevents many of the situations that typically trigger anger. This shifts your energy from reactive protection to proactive definition of your personal space and standards. The practice of boundary setting requires ongoing attention and refinement. Like the house with well-designed doors and windows, you must regularly maintain and adjust your boundaries to ensure they remain both protective and permeable in appropriate measures. This dynamic balance eliminates the need for anger's crude protection, while creating space for authentic engagement with life. Through mastering boundaries, you develop a new relationship with both self-protection and connection. Rather than swinging between defenseless exposure and angry withdrawal, you learn to maintain a consistent, calm clarity about your limits while remaining open to genuine intimacy. This transformation lies at the heart of letting go of anger, not by becoming vulnerable to violation, but by creating such clear and consistent boundaries that anger's protective function becomes largely obsolete. Like a skilled martial artist who remains relaxed yet ready, you cultivate an inner stance that naturally deflects intrusion while welcoming authentic connection. Your boundaries become an expression of self-respect rather than fear, allowing you to move through life with quiet confidence. This balanced approach eliminates the exhausting cycle of overextending yourself, followed by reactive withdrawal. Instead, you establish a sustainable foundation that supports both your need for safety and your desire for meaningful relationships. The power of well-maintained boundaries extends beyond mere protection. It creates a sacred space where genuine trust can flourish. When others encounter your clear, consistent limits, they naturally adjust their behavior, eliminating many potential conflicts before they arise. This shift from defensive reaction to proactive definition transforms not only your relationship with anger, but your entire approach to human connection. Chapter 13. The Alchemy of Acceptance. When you find yourself caught in life's quicksand, those situations that trigger overwhelming anger and resistance, your instinctive response often makes things worse. Like someone thrashing against the shifting sands, each attempt to force your way out only pulls you deeper into emotional turmoil. Yet within this desperate struggle lies a profound truth. The path to freedom requires the courage to do what feels counterintuitive, to stop fighting what is. Consider how acceptance operates in physical quicksand. The life-saving response isn't to battle against it, but to spread your weight, lie back, and allow yourself to float on its surface. This same principle applies to emotional reality. When you stop exhausting yourself by fighting against unchangeable circumstances, you discover a natural buoyancy that keeps you above the pull of anger and reactivity. This radical acceptance has nothing to do with resignation or approval. You don't have to like what's happening to accept that it is happening. Acceptance simply means acknowledging reality as it actually is, not as you wish it to be. This clear-eyed recognition creates the foundation for genuine change by freeing up the energy previously consumed by resistance. The paradox of acceptance reveals itself in how it transforms your relationship with challenging situations. When you resist reality, you create a secondary layer of suffering on top of the initial difficulty. Your mind generates endless narratives about how things shouldn't be this way, how unfair it is, how others should behave differently. This mental resistance doesn't change the situation. It only intensifies your emotional turmoil. Like an alchemist transmuting lead into gold, acceptance transforms the raw material of difficult circumstances into opportunities for growth and understanding. The lead doesn't disappear. It becomes something more valuable through the courage to work with what is rather than fighting against it. This alchemical process begins with the willingness to face reality exactly as it presents itself. This distinction proves crucial. Accepting the facts of a situation differs fundamentally from accepting mistreatment or injustice. You can acknowledge that someone behaved poorly without believing their behavior was acceptable. This clarity allows you to respond effectively rather than react emotionally. Acceptance of what is becomes the stable ground from which you can work to change what can be changed. When you truly accept reality as it is, you release the enormous energy previously consumed by resistance. This liberated energy becomes available for constructive action or peaceful presence. Instead of exhausting yourself fighting against the quicksand of unwanted circumstances, you find yourself floating above it, able to navigate with wisdom rather than thrash with reactivity. The practice of radical acceptance begins by turning toward what you most want to avoid. In moments of anger or resistance, pause to acknowledge the reality of your experience. This is happening. This is how I feel right now. This is the situation as it is. This simple but profound recognition creates space between you and your automatic reactions. The power of acceptance reveals itself most clearly in situations that trigger intense resistance. When someone behaves in ways that violate your expectations, when circumstances unfold contrary to your wishes, when life presents challenges you didn't ask for. These moments offer opportunities to practice this transformative skill. Each time you choose acceptance over resistance, you strengthen your capacity to respond to life as it is rather than as you demand it should be. This practice doesn't make you passive or powerless. Instead, it grounds you in reality, allowing you to clearly see what can and cannot be changed. From this foundation of acceptance, genuine power emerges. Not the illusory power of demanding reality be different, but the authentic power of engaging with life as it actually presents itself. Through acceptance, you gain access to your deepest wisdom and most effective responses. You move beyond the exhausting cycle of resistance that drains your energy and clouds your judgment. When you stop fighting against what is, you free up tremendous resources, mental, emotional, and physical, to take meaningful action where it matters most. Your responses become measured and intentional rather than automatic and reactive, transforming you from a victim of circumstance into a skilled navigator of life's challenges. Chapter 14. The Liberation of Forgiveness. Picture two boats in a turbulent sea, bound together by thick ropes that once served a purpose, but now only restrict movement. No matter how vigorously the first boat rows forward, it remains tethered to the second, their fates inextricably linked by these bindings. Such is the nature of unforgiveness, a connection that persists long after its utility has ended, keeping you bound to those who have hurt you through the very anger you believe protects you from them. Each surge of resentment, each replay of past injuries, each moment spent wishing things had been different. These are the ropes that maintain your connection to what has wounded you. You may believe your anger creates distance, but in reality it binds you more tightly to the very experiences you wish to leave behind. Forgiveness represents not a pardon for those who have wronged you, but your own declaration of emotional independence. It means choosing to cut the cords that keep you anchored to past hurts, allowing your vessel to chart its own course once more. This liberation has nothing to do with excusing harmful actions or minimizing the impact of what occurred. Rather, it marks your decision to stop allowing past events to control your present experience. Your resistance to forgiveness likely stems from common misconceptions: that it means pretending the hurt never happened, that it requires reconciliation with those who harmed you, or that it somehow diminishes the significance of your suffering. None of these accurately capture true forgiveness. You can fully acknowledge the reality and impact of what occurred while choosing to release your emotional bondage to it. Consider how holding on to anger resembles drinking poison while hoping it will harm someone else. The toxicity of sustained resentment primarily affects its bearer, creating a self-imposed punishment that changes nothing about the past while corrupting your present moment. Your unforgiveness maintains a psychological connection that continues to drain your energy and restrict your movement through life. The path of forgiveness begins not with forced positive feelings, but with the simple intention to free yourself. It starts with recognizing how your sustained anger serves as an invisible prison, keeping you bound to what has hurt you through your very resistance to it. Forgiveness means gradually releasing your expectation that the past could have unfolded differently, not because what happened was okay, but because this expectation only prolongs your suffering. This release occurs not as a single decision, but as a progressive journey. It starts with acknowledging your right to feel anger about what occurred while choosing to stop investing that anger, with the power to define your present experience. Each step toward forgiveness returns a measure of freedom to your life, redirecting energy from maintaining grievances to creating the future you desire. Think of forgiveness as declaring emotional bankruptcy on old debts that will never be repaid. This doesn't erase what was owed, but it frees you from the exhausting process of trying to collect on debts that only diminish your own life through their pursuit. It means choosing your own liberation over the illusion of justice through sustained resentment. The practice of forgiveness begins with small steps, moments of choosing to release your grip on anger even briefly, allowing yourself to experience the lightness that comes with setting down this burden. It develops through consistent recognition of how unforgiveness primarily restricts your own freedom, keeping you bound to past hurts through the very energy of your resistance to them. This journey doesn't require you to forgive everything at once or to pretend you've moved past hurts that still feel raw. Instead, it invites you to begin wherever you are, taking small steps toward emotional freedom by gradually loosening the ropes that bind you to past wounds. Each moment of letting go, however brief, creates space for new possibilities in your life. As you practice this release, you may notice how much of your energy has been consumed by maintaining connections you thought you wanted to sever. The very force of your resistance has kept you bound to what has hurt you, while forgiveness offers a path to genuine liberation. Not from accountability or truth, but from the emotional bondage that changes nothing about the past while limiting your experience of the present. Chapter 15. The Wisdom of Impermanence. You've come far in your journey of understanding anger and its role in your life. Now it's time to explore perhaps the most liberating truth of all, one that has brought comfort to seekers of wisdom across millennia. The fundamental impermanence of all experiences, including the most intense emotional states. Consider how a king once approached his wisest advisor, seeking words that would serve dual purposes, to bring solace in times of despair and humility in moments of triumph. After deep contemplation, the advisor offered just 4 words: "This too shall pass." In these simple words lay a profound truth about the nature of all experience, that every state, no matter how intense or overwhelming, is inherently temporary. This truth applies equally to your experiences of anger. When in its grip, anger can feel like a permanent condition, as if it has always been and will always be part of your identity. This perceived permanence is precisely what makes anger feel so overwhelming, the unconscious assumption that this state will last forever. Yet closer observation reveals a different reality. Like waves on the ocean, emotions naturally arise and dissolve. Their very nature is to move, to transform, to pass through the field of your awareness. Only your mental resistance and identification with them creates the illusion of permanence. When you're caught in intense anger, it can seem impossible to imagine ever feeling different. The emotion fills your entire consciousness, convincing you it will always be this way. But consider how many times you've been angry before. Where are those angers now? They've dissolved back into the ocean of experience, leaving no trace except in memory. This understanding of impermanence doesn't diminish the reality or intensity of your emotional experience. Rather, it offers a profound shift in how you relate to it. Instead of becoming identified with anger as if it were a permanent part of who you are, you can recognize it as a temporary state moving through your awareness. Understanding impermanence transforms our relationship with anger in several crucial ways. First, it relieves the pressure of feeling that you must immediately control or eliminate anger when it arises. When you know it will naturally pass, you can afford to be more patient with the process. Second, it prevents anger from defining your sense of self. You are not an angry person, but rather a conscious being, experiencing temporary states of anger. Think of emotions as weather patterns moving through the sky of your awareness. Just as the sky isn't defined by any particular weather condition, your essential nature isn't defined by any emotional state. Storms may come, bringing thunder and lightning, but they invariably pass, revealing once again the clear sky that was always present behind them. This perspective allows you to experience anger without becoming anger. You can acknowledge its presence while maintaining awareness of its temporary nature. This creates a crucial space around the emotion, a knowing that this too shall pass, which prevents it from consuming your entire experience. Paradoxically, resisting emotions or trying to force them to pass often extends their duration. When you fight against what is, you create tension that sustains the very state you're trying to eliminate. Allowing emotions to arise and pass naturally without interference actually accelerates their movement through your awareness. Think of emotions as visitors knocking at your door. Some are pleasant guests you'd like to stay longer, while others are challenging presences you'd rather not deal with. Yet none of them, neither the welcome nor the unwelcome, will stay forever unless you insist they move in permanently. Your role is not to control who comes to the door, but to remember that every visitor eventually departs. This understanding of impermanence becomes especially powerful when dealing with triggering situations. When someone pushes your buttons and anger arises, remembering its temporary nature helps prevent you from becoming completely identified with the emotion. You can acknowledge, yes, anger is present now, while maintaining awareness that this state, like all states, will naturally pass. The responsibility then shifts from trying to control or eliminate anger to simply observing its natural life cycle. Like watching clouds move across the sky, you can witness anger's arising, its peak intensity, and its eventual dissolution, all without needing to interfere with the process. This brings us to a transformative practice that develops your capacity to work skillfully with anger's impermanent nature. Note: stopping here as we've covered the core concepts from the instructions before moving into the practical application section. Chapter 16. The Courage to be Vulnerable. Behind every surge of anger lies a deeper truth waiting to be acknowledged. When you find yourself consumed by rage, believing it represents your true power, consider the image of two warriors preparing for battle. The first dons layers of heavy armor, each piece adding to their sense of invulnerability. Yet with each layer, their movement becomes more restricted, their vision more limited, their connection to their surroundings more distant. The second warrior chooses lighter protection, maintaining their agility and awareness while accepting that absolute invulnerability is an illusion. Your anger often serves as emotional armor, a protective shell against deeper feelings that feel too threatening to acknowledge directly. Like that heavily armored warrior, you may believe this protection keeps you safe, but it comes at the cost of authentic connection, emotional freedom, and true resilience. Beneath anger's fierce exterior usually lie more vulnerable emotions: hurt, fear, rejection, shame, or grief. These primary feelings often feel too exposing or overwhelming to face directly. Anger steps in as a secondary emotion, transforming the discomfort of vulnerability into the more manageable sensation of righteous indignation. This conversion from vulnerability to anger happens so quickly and automatically that you may have lost awareness it's occurring. While anger might feel like strength, true power lies in the courage to acknowledge what lies beneath it. Meeting these deeper emotions directly requires profound bravery, far more than anger's reactive defense. When you dare to say, "I'm hurt," instead of "I'm angry," you step into authentic power that creates possibilities for genuine connection and resolution. Consider how water extinguishes fire. Similarly, embracing vulnerability often naturally dissolves anger at its source. By acknowledging, "I feel rejected," or "I'm afraid of being dismissed," you address the root cause rather than its aggressive expression. This direct encounter with vulnerable emotions, while initially uncomfortable, creates space for authentic healing impossible through anger's protective barriers. The pathway through anger requires becoming an emotional archaeologist, carefully excavating layers of reactive protection to uncover the tender feelings beneath. This doesn't mean abandoning healthy boundaries or accepting mistreatment. Rather, it means facing your internal experience with courage and compassion, recognizing that vulnerability requires greater strength than defensiveness. When you dare to lower your emotional armor, even slightly, something remarkable occurs. Like the lighter armored warrior who maintains connection with their environment, you become more agile in your responses, more aware of nuance, more capable of genuine intimacy. The very vulnerability you feared becomes your pathway to authentic power and meaningful connection. This transformation begins with recognizing when you're using anger as armor. Notice the instant conversion of hurt to rage, of fear to aggression, of shame to blame. In that recognition lies the choice to respond differently, to acknowledge the deeper truth of your experience rather than reflexively defending against it. Your relationship with vulnerability influences every aspect of your emotional life. The degree to which you can acknowledge and hold space for tender feelings determines your capacity for authentic connection, both with yourself and others. This doesn't mean living without protection. Rather, it means choosing conscious discernment over automatic defensiveness. The courage to be vulnerable transforms not only your relationship with anger, but with all emotions. It creates a foundation for living authentically rather than reactively, for engaging with life directly rather than through layers of protection that ultimately restrict more than they safeguard. Much like that second warrior who chooses mobility and awareness over the illusion of invulnerability, you can learn to navigate life's challenges with presence and adaptability rather than rigid defense. This path requires trust in your innate resilience, faith that you can handle difficult emotions without converting them to anger's more familiar territory. When you release the need for constant emotional armor, you discover an inherent strength far more reliable than any defensive wall. Your natural resilience emerges not from shutting down feelings, but from allowing them to flow through you while maintaining your center. This isn't about becoming more vulnerable to harm. It's about becoming more capable of authentic engagement with life's full spectrum of experiences. Chapter 17: The Practice of Non-Attachment. Imagine trying to hold water in your hands. When you clench your fist tightly, desperate to retain every drop, it all escapes through the cracks between your fingers. Yet when you cup your palms openly, the water rests there peacefully, if only for a moment, before naturally flowing on. This fundamental difference reveals a profound truth about your relationship with life's experiences, particularly those that trigger anger and resistance. Your suffering often stems not from circumstances themselves, but from your desperate attempt to control them. Like trying to grasp water with clenched fists, the tighter you grip your expectations about how things should be, the more completely they slip through your fingers, leaving you with nothing but frustration and tension. Non-attachment offers a radically different approach. Rather than clutching desperately at your preferences or violently rejecting what displeases you, it invites you to hold all experiences with open palms, acknowledging them fully, while allowing them to flow through your awareness without resistance. This doesn't mean becoming passive or indifferent. Instead, it means engaging with life from a place of psychological flexibility rather than rigid demand. Consider how often your anger arises from life's failure to meet your expectations, about how others should behave, how events should unfold, or how you should feel. Each expectation becomes a potential source of suffering when reality inevitably charts its own course. Your insistence that reality conform to your specifications creates a battleground where peace might otherwise exist. Think of non-attachment as learning to sail, rather than trying to control the wind. A skilled sailor doesn't fight against the prevailing winds or curse their direction. Instead, they develop the wisdom to work with whatever conditions arise, adjusting their sails and course accordingly. Sometimes this means moving forward directly, sometimes tacking sideways to harness crosswinds, but always progressing through alignment rather than resistance. This approach transforms your relationship with triggering situations. Instead of meeting them with rigid expectations that breed disappointment and anger, you develop the flexibility to respond appropriately to what actually is. This doesn't mean abandoning your preferences or goals. The sailor still has a destination in mind, but it means holding them lightly enough to adapt when conditions require a different approach. The practice of non-attachment begins with preference awareness, noticing when your natural preferences harden into rigid demands. Start observing how your mind creates elaborate expectations about how things should be, then generates anger when reality fails to comply. Watch how these expectations form, how they feel in your body, and how they color your experience before any external event has even occurred. Notice the difference between holding a preference lightly, "I would prefer if this meeting started on time," versus clutching a demand, "This meeting absolutely must start on time or someone will pay." The first maintains flexibility and peace regardless of outcome. The second establishes conditions for anger before anything has even happened. This isn't about becoming a passive observer of life or denying your natural desires for certain outcomes. Instead, it's about developing the wisdom to engage fully with life while releasing the insistence that it conform to your specifications. It's about recognizing that your peace need not depend on external circumstances aligning perfectly with your preferences. True non-attachment creates a profound shift in how you experience potential triggers. When you're not rigidly attached to particular outcomes, provocations lose their power to generate sustained anger. You can acknowledge disappointment when things don't go as hoped, while maintaining your fundamental equilibrium. This becomes the foundation for genuine peace, Not because circumstances always please you, but because you've released your demand that they must. You're developing an inner spaciousness that can hold both your preferences and reality's actual unfolding without creating conflict between them. Like those open palms holding water, you create space for experience to flow naturally while maintaining your capacity to respond appropriately without the extra suffering that comes from resistance. This expansive inner territory becomes your sanctuary, a place where disappointments and triumphs alike can exist without disturbing your fundamental peace. You learn to dance with life's currents rather than fighting against them, discovering that true power lies not in controlling the flow, but in maintaining your balance as you move with it. Your preferences remain, but they no longer dictate your well-being, existing instead as gentle guides rather than rigid demands. Chapter 18. The Journey of Integration. Imagine a garden that once demanded constant vigilance, every weed threatening to overtake your carefully planted beds, each day bringing new challenges that required immediate intervention. Yet through patient, persistent tending, this same space has transformed. The soil, enriched by years of careful cultivation, now naturally supports healthy growth. Weeds still appear, but no longer dominate. What once required exhausting daily battles has evolved into a sustainable rhythm of occasional maintenance and abundant harvest. This transformation mirrors your own journey in mastering the art of letting go. Just as a garden shifts from requiring constant intervention to developing its own ecological balance, your relationship with anger evolves from conscious effort to natural inclination. The neural pathways that once automatically led to anger begin to rewire themselves through consistent practice, creating new default responses that arise with increasing ease. Understanding this progression proves crucial because many abandon their practice when it doesn't yield immediate transformation. They expect linear progress, a steady march from reactivity to peace, and become discouraged when their journey includes apparent setbacks or periods of regression. Yet this overlooks how genuine transformation actually unfolds. Consider how a musician develops mastery. At first, every note requires conscious thought. Scales must be practiced deliberately, each finger placement considered. The technical foundations can feel mechanical, even tedious. But through persistent practice, what began as conscious effort gradually becomes embodied knowledge. The fingers find their way without conscious direction. Technical mastery transforms into artistic expression. The music flows not from thought but from being. Your journey with anger follows a similar trajectory. Initially, catching triggers before they escalate requires constant vigilance. The practices of presence, perspective shifting, and conscious response demand deliberate attention. You might successfully navigate one triggering situation only to feel blindsided by the next. This is not failure. It's the natural process of rewiring deeply ingrained patterns. Integration doesn't mean you never experience anger. Rather, it means your relationship with anger fundamentally shifts. What once consumed you now moves through you. What once triggered automatic reactions now encounters spacious awareness. The practice of letting go becomes less something you do and more something you are. This integration deepens through cycles rather than linear progression. Like a spiral staircase, you may revisit similar challenges at different levels of awareness. What appears as regression often contains deeper lessons that accelerate growth. The trigger that seems to set you back actually reveals subtle patterns ready for transformation. Common obstacles to integration include stress, fatigue, and challenging relationships that activate old patterns. During these periods, maintaining practice requires self-compassion and practical strategy. Just as a garden needs different care in different seasons, your practice must adapt to changing conditions. This might mean simplifying your approach during stressful times or increasing supportive practices when facing particular challenges. The key lies in recognizing that each moment of practice, however imperfect, contributes to your transformation. Every time you catch anger arising and choose a different response, you strengthen new neural pathways. Every instance of choosing presence over reactivity reinforces your capacity for conscious response. The effects compound gradually, often imperceptibly. Until one day you notice yourself responding with natural ease to situations that once triggered immediate reaction. Think of this integration as cultivating fertile soil in your internal garden. Each practice of letting go, however small, adds another layer of rich compost to your psychological earth. While individual instances might seem insignificant, their cumulative effect creates conditions where peace and presence grow with increasing naturalness. Integration mapping helps track this subtle progress by noting small victories often overlooked in gradual transformation. This involves regularly reflecting on questions like, what situations that once triggered me do I now navigate with ease? Where do I notice space between stimulus and response that wasn't there before? How has my default response to challenge evolved? This mapping process serves multiple purposes. It validates your progress when the journey feels slow. It identifies areas for continued growth without judgment. Most importantly, it reveals the deeper patterns of your transformation, helping you trust the process even when progress seems unclear. Integration ultimately represents not an endpoint, but an ever-deepening capacity for presence, understanding, and conscious response. Like a garden that becomes more abundant and self-sustaining through years of tending, your practice continues to unfold in ever-widening circles of awareness and freedom. Each season brings new blossoms of insight, deeper roots of understanding, and a richer harvest of wisdom. The more you cultivate this inner landscape, the more naturally it flourishes, creating spaces of profound clarity where reactivity once grew wild. Your transformation flows outward, touching every aspect of your life with an organic grace that makes your previous struggles feel like distant memories. Conclusion. Throughout this journey, you've explored the transformative path from reactivity to freedom, discovering how letting go of anger opens the door to a fundamentally different way of being in the world. What began as an exploration of anger management has revealed itself as something far more profound, a complete shift in how you relate to life's inevitable challenges and provocations. You've discovered that freedom from anger isn't found in controlling external circumstances, but in transforming your relationship with them. The space between stimulus and response, once barely noticeable, now reveals itself as an infinite field of possibility, where choice replaces reaction. The witness perspective, strengthened through consistent practice, allows you to observe emotional storms without being swept away by them. The power of presence, like a steady lighthouse in turbulent seas, dissolves both past resentments and future anxieties, anchoring you in the only moment where peace is possible. Through forgiveness, you've learned to cut the invisible cords that kept you bound to past hurts. Through acceptance, you've discovered how embracing reality as it is creates the foundation for meaningful change. These aren't merely techniques to manage anger. They're gateways to a fundamentally different way of experiencing life. Yet this journey isn't about reaching a destination where anger never arises. Such an expectation would only create another form of resistance. Instead, you've developed a new relationship with this natural emotion, one where it no longer controls or defines you. Anger may still arise, but you no longer become anger. It moves through your awareness like weather through the sky, noticed but not identified with. The setbacks and challenges you'll encounter aren't failures but opportunities to deepen your practice. Each moment of catching yourself in old patterns strengthens your capacity to choose differently. Each return to presence after being lost in reaction builds the neural pathways of awareness and responsibility. This transformation extends far beyond personal benefit. As you release the habits of anger, you create ripples of peace that touch every relationship, every interaction, every community you're part of. Your freedom from reactivity creates space for others to find their own way to peace. Remember, in letting go of anger, you're not losing anything of value. You're releasing a burden that was never meant to be carried. You're not becoming less powerful but more authentic, not more vulnerable but more resilient. The peace you seek isn't something to be created but uncovered. It's your natural state when the habits of anger fall away. The present moment, free from the distortions of anger and reactivity, holds everything you've been seeking. It's here that life reveals itself in its fullness, free from the filters of past resentments or future fears. This awareness itself becomes both the path and the destination, an ever-deepening journey into the freedom that has been yours all along. An ever-deepening journey into the freedom that has been yours all along.